Welcome, everybody. Welcome. What beautiful faces, all of them, from all around the world. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to thank Catherine playing the harp, our beautiful, beautiful harpist. And let me tell you a little tiny bit about her. As a certified music thanatologist, Catharine DeLong tends to the emotional, physical, and spiritual needs of palliative patients with harp and voice. She is an ordained interfaith minister through One Spirit and currently provides chaplaincy services as well as music sessions to hospice patients in Salt Lake City, Utah. Catharine teaches music as medicine at the end of life to New York Open Center and other end-of-life students. David Wallace also joins me. And we are here with our beloved Barbara Becker. And what are we going to be talking about? Heartwood, the art of living with the end in mind. And I'd like to acknowledge that this is a topic that nobody feels lukewarm about. This is a topic that we either are willing to engage or not. And so here we are, brave souls that we are, ready to talk about dying and the art of living. So now let's hear a little bit about Barbara, shall we? Barbara has dedicated more than 25 years to partnering with human rights advocates around the world in pursuit of peace and interreligious understanding. She is an ordained interfaith, interspiritual minister from One Spirit's class of 2017. She was also a first-year dean for 2 years and has sat with hundreds of people at the end of their lives. Writing is near and dear to Barbara's heart. Before she began writing her own stories, she ghost wrote op-eds for other people, most of it on international law and policy. That work was stimulating, but she knew she wanted to find her own voice. It's evident in reading Heartwood that she was well-trained. From page 1, she tells her story, including only what needs to be said. She began her 365-day blog when her earliest childhood friend was diagnosed with breast cancer and was living out the last year of her life. During that time, Barbara was completely absorbed by the question, can we live our lives more fully, knowing someday we would die? If you'd like to know more, go to barbarabecker.com and I will put that in the chat. Barbara?
Thank you so much, Martha, David, Catherine, and David, who's running our audio tonight. I already had to get up and get the box of tissues because I'm scrolling through these screens, and I have been looking forward to talking to this beloved community for so long. I mean, this is a place where people don't run away from things that are hard. And I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for showing up tonight. One thing we thought we would do is start with a land acknowledgement. And we're not going to do it in the traditional way of acknowledging the land that I am currently sitting on. But if you have read Heartwood, you know that I've been doing memorial services at the Potter's Field in New York City, where people are being buried during the COVID pandemic. So I will give you the land acknowledgement that I do for those memorial services. Hart Island is situated at the western edge of the Long Island Sound, on land originally inhabited by the Sewanee tribe of the Wappinger peoples. We pay respect to them and to the many nations, tribes, and bands that traveled in and made use of this land and water. We give thanks to Mother Earth for embracing her children who are being returned to this sacred ground. She receives them all equally, regardless of where they were from or the circumstances that brought them there. With all of our intention, we commit ourselves to upholding the values of relationship, responsibility, respect, and reciprocity, ever mindful of the past, the present, and of the generations yet to come. And in the Algonquin tongue spoken throughout this area, we now say Wanishi, thank you. So I thought I would start this evening by reading a little bit of the introduction to Heartwood, the author's note. As you may know, Heartwood is the central metaphor of my book. And Heartwood is the core of the tree, the most durable, enduring part, prized by woodworkers for its strength. But what most people don't know is that Heartwood is dead. It's completely inert. It no longer participates in the flow of water and nutrients up and down the tree. But for the growth rings to grow and the tree to keep going skyward, we need that core, that core that's no longer alive. So for me, Heartwood is that symbol of wholeness, a complete reciprocity between the living and the dead. So let me read to you from the author's note. I have learned that being open to death is a powerful way to learn about living. That when we stop pretending we will live forever, a certain tightness begins to loosen. Slowly, as we give ourselves permission to relax and to relax the vice grip we use to try to control our circumstances, a sense of freedom emerges from within. Though little may have changed on the outside, and loss will continue to be our companion, our internal landscape is renewed. Just as we cherish ourselves more, we will cherish others more as well. Sometimes, as the great masters have taught, we have to die before we die if we want to truly live.
Hey, Barbara, it's David. I'm so glad to see you, and massive congratulations on this book. It's been a companion for me all summer, and your stories and your precision in telling them have really been an encouragement to me. And I think in this time in which we need some encouraging, to have the witness of others' capacity to face with what is really extraordinary. So congratulations on this book.
Thank you.
There's a lot to talk about tonight. Certainly, living and dying, and how we face our own grief. But to start, could you just talk about the image of Heartwood particularly, how did you come on this image? What was that like the first time it hit you? Where did it come from? And how has it shifted through the writing of this book? Or another way to ask that question is, how have you shifted in the face of this image of the Heartwood?
Great question. So for those of you who have had the chance to read Heartwood, you know that both of my parents died within a couple of months of each other. It was such a tremendously difficult time. And I felt lost. And I would go out in nature, where I've found most of the lessons of my life that resonate so true. And I recall the time that my husband and my kids went to visit those giant redwood trees out in California. And if you ever have the chance to go to one of those national parks, you'll see like a cross section of a huge old growth tree where they put the pins for, like, the Vikings coming to North America, and Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, and the founding of Oxford University, and the Declaration of Independence. And you can count how old the tree is by those rings. But it really struck me that, each of us is like a tree, and my parents hadn't gone anywhere. They were part of the essential core of who I am. And even further, I started to feel this sense of comfort that someday I will be Heartwood too. If all things go in the order in which it's natural, like, I will be Heartwood to my children, to my grandchildren, and they will someday be Heartwood too. The news today is full of images from those very same old growth forests where the wildfires are whipping through the land. They've wrapped some of the oldest trees in that silver fire retardant material so they don't burn to the ground. Here on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where I live, we are inundated with flood water, and we've not been doing very well in terms of flooding in the past couple of storms. And they are about to take down 1,000 trees along our river park in order to build a berm to protect the city from this flooding. And you ask, like, how I change in all of this, and what a lesson. I mean, I want to believe that Heartwood is forever, and I do believe that our loved ones are our core. But at the end of the day, impermanence is the rule of the land. Someday the Heartwood won't even be there, and that's okay too.
Heartwood was particularly powerful for me because it's so intimate, and the memoir format just felt so perfect for demonstrating how to be awake to every happiness and also every heartache. What advice do you have for us, Barbara, so that we can fully inhabit our lives? How can we open ourselves to both the joy and the sorrow?
I love that you brought up intimacy, because I really think that we can only be intimate with others to the degree that we're able to be intimate with ourselves and our own internal landscape. And to me, that really speaks to having a practice. I know for you, Catherine, it's so beautiful. You have this practice of music that has touched so many people. And I know that personally because I've shadowed you on the hospice floors, and I've seen what your music does to not only the dying, but also the people who are companioning them at the bedside. I mean, people, you just notice all the worry kind of just dissolve off their faces. And I know that's a practice for you too. for me, it might look like meditation. For others, it's zikr, music, dance, it's sort of whatever speaks most to us. But, I think there's something more too. And it's that, practice is important, but it's also bringing it back. Like this, we do this not to get better at meditation or at playing music, but so that we can be better at our lives, and also at the lives of being present with other people. So to me, just this learning to be at the bedside really is also a practice of being totally crystal clear to whatever degree we can with ourselves, and always focusing on turning around and returning it to someone else.
How do we see and experience the divine with people that we serve and people that we love, especially in situations that are seemingly tragic?
That's a hard one. I have had some patients, and for me, you'll know in reading the book that I am the person who was the candy striper in high school who fainted at the sight of blood and gore, like on my very first day on the job. So I just didn't last long at it. And it's really hard for me, or it had been very hard for me, to be completely present to complete physical suffering. So I developed these little tricks that kind of worked for me. I had one patient who was all of 19 years old, and he had some kind of bone cancer that caused his head to be enormous and completely disfigured. And, this just became not about me. His little son was climbing on his bed, and I found one little part of this man's hand that was so perfect, exactly the way that it was. And that was my way of entering his space. I think the hospice people have all kinds of tricks for dealing with those moments. Other hard moments for me are when patients are understandably completely irritated with you. Like, you are the volunteer or the chaplain in the room, and they can tell you to get out. I mean, the chances are they're not going to do that to a doctor, but we're kind of low down on the ladder, and they, if they're not happy with you, they will tell you to get out of the room. And there's like this, that thing about finding our own stillness and being able to understand how that could happen and why that makes perfect sense. Those are ways of just entering into that divine core that I believe is in every single person, regardless of their physical or mental state in that moment.
I just want to say I had the privilege of playing for Barbara's father and for Aunt Bev shortly before he died, and I think not too long before she died as well, and it was just such an honor. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Catherine. And I just want to say too that after I'd heard Catherine play for several months on the hospice floor at Bellevue in New York City, where I was working, and Catherine was playing, I went to her and I said, do you also do joyful occasions? Because my son's bar mitzvah is coming up, and I wonder if you would play there. So Catherine did, and has seen my family through all kinds of life events, the sadness and also the joy. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, that was joyful.
That was so joyful, except for the part where the rabbi didn't show up for a long time, and I thought I was going to have to do the service myself.
So I want to ask a question that's impossible to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You've accompanied so many people through their deaths. And I'm wondering if there's one central teaching that you could articulate for those of us who are facing our own death, which all of us are. Just a tiny question, Barbara.
Just a tiny question. I think what I have learned in the process of doing this work, but also of being in the One Spirit community, is that the place of discomfort is the place we want to go. Now, we are so trained to move away from the parts where there are no words, where things feel ineffable, where our voice catches at the back of our throat, or we feel tears welling up. And, we stumble over words. We don't know what we're going to say. It's right there in those very, very tricky and vulnerable places where we move from our hearts, or like from our heads, I guess, to our hearts, to kind of a liminal space where the things that really matter can come to the surface. And I would say that it's a place I'm beginning to feel more and more comfortable. I don't really care what I look like or sound like in those moments, because I think that's where truth with a capital T is found.
Yeah. Thank you.
Barbara, hi.
Hi.
Would you please share some wise counsel that you've been given since your own diagnosis of early stage 1 breast cancer on, of all days, April 1st?
Right, April Fool's Day. I know how I wish it were so, but unfortunately.
Before you start, though, I'm not quite finished, because what I'm wondering about is, how has this diagnosis impacted your own Heartwood and growth rings?
So on the day that Heartwood was being released into the world, I was having a second surgery for a newly diagnosed breast cancer. I would say that, we're living during times of COVID. So I didn't even get to be present with my doctor when she told me that I had breast cancer. And she kind of launched into the findings of the biopsy, which were kind of inconclusive at the beginning. And she stopped and she said, "You must be shocked. How are you?" And I thought about all of these people who I have loved and I have lost. And, it really wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a, like, why me kind of moment. It was sort of a why not me kind of moment. And I think that kind of thing happens when you start dealing in the realm of death as much as I have. At the beginning, I had no idea what we were looking at. You don't know until they've looked at your lymph nodes whether this has traveled throughout your body already. You're waiting for genetic testing before you find out what kind of surgery and what kind of treatment plan you're going to have. And it's all a radical lesson in surrender, and just going step by step. Your future story kind of gets cut, and you have to live in the moment. There's no other place to live. Except for the moments that I jumped ahead of myself and I was catastrophizing. Like, what is this going to look like? Will I be around for my kids and meeting their partners someday? Like all the typical fears and anxiety that you can imagine comes up with a diagnosis. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I got was from a friend who has multiple sclerosis. And he said to me, Barbara, you are writing chapter 24 of your life when you're only on chapter 4. And that had the power of taking me right back to the present moment to kind of see what I was doing in terms of all of that future thinking that was just destructive. I underwent a month of daily radiation, and another friend who had also been through a health journey of his own, I was kind of complaining, I've got to go in the heat of a New York City summer to NYU hospital every single day. And he knows how much pilgrimage means to me. I had hiked the Camino de Santiago a couple of years back after my dad had died. And my friend said, you're just going to have to think about going up to NYU every day as a form of pilgrimage. So this wisdom from people in my life was like gold to me. Honestly, I don't know how I would have endured so much of it without their pointing me back to my own North Star, really. I also had a Sufi teacher who gave me some beautiful practices from the Sufi tradition. And then she reminded me of the joy. She said, if all else fails, just put on Let It Go from Frozen and dance around your living room. And that also became a place of practice for me, of finding joy, of remembering that there were parts of my body that were not failing, of just being present to all of it. It's all a journey of learning to accept life as it is, rather than life as we want it to be.
I've just been really moved by how open you are, Barbara, to all of life, to the life and to the death, all of the richness that's around us if we only can see it. I was wondering how you are experiencing that now, and you've talked a little bit about your breast cancer, but what's the next chapter of Heartwood?
So I've been a little bit surprised and encouraged by some people who have come to me after reading Heartwood, reminding me that we have loss all around us. We have the end of life, of people we love, but we also have loss of relationship, and people who have been through divorces have come and said how meaningful this was. People who have lost their own health status as a healthy individual and will never be seen the same way again. People who lost their jobs during COVID, people who've lost their homes. The sense of loss is so incredibly deep right now. It permeates everything. One of the things that happens in the place where I was volunteering as a hospice chaplain was that when you experience a loss in your inner circle, you have to take a break. They don't want you putting your grief process on other people, which is so wise. But after a while, I got impatient, and I went out and I got trained as a disaster chaplain in the city of New York. And that's how I've been doing these memorial services at the Potter's Field in New York City. I have done memorial services for Red Cross volunteers who served on the pile at 9/11. There's so many people who are sick from the work they did 20 years ago, and who are dying. And the calls are endless. Please come to New Orleans. Please go out to the wildfires. We're on hand for aviation disasters. And as soon as my health gets a little bit better, I really see that as a big part of my own next chapter.
It's me again.
Hello.
I know that 2 of your teachers recently died. Rahab Rinpoche, a Tibetan Buddhist master, as well as His Holiness, the 33rd Menri Treason, spiritual leader of the Bon Tibetan tradition. Can you tell us how their dying has inspired you as you engage in the art of living?
Thank you for bringing them into the room, Martha. Yeah, so parallel to this journey of losing my parents, I lost two teachers who were extremely important to me. Rahab Rinpoche was a Rime teacher, meaning he brought all of the different schools of Tibetan Buddhism into a single practice. He was also a Dzogchen master. And as he was getting older and quite sick, he knew he didn't have a lot of time. So he called students together, and we went to his barn up on the New York side of the Berkshires. It was a freezing cold day. And he so generously, through his illness, through his aging body, climbed the stairs of the loft of this barn. It was freezing cold, and taught us a tantric practice called Poa, which some people might know from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it's a little bit esoteric, but it's a practice of transferring consciousness up the central channel of the body through the top of the head into the Buddha realms. It's not something Westerners usually learn so easily, and I just considered it a great gift from him to all of us. After he died, it was really the height of the COVID pandemic in the area, and we could not be with him, his body, his wife, other people in the community. So they put him in the downstairs shrine room of this barn, and they put a webcam on the coffin, open casket. And for 3 days, I left that camera on in another room of our apartment. And in the middle of the night, I would wake up and I would go sit with him in the dark. And it was sort of like, the modern day death appreciation practices where you're watching a body decompose. I remember watching a little roach run into his sleeve and into the buttons of his jacket. And it was so real. And it was such a gift that he left to all of us, that we could be present in that way. Menri Treason was the 33rd leader of the Bon tradition, which is the indigenous tradition of Tibet, which has many practices that look similar to Buddhism, but also has some shamanistic practices as well. And the Dalai Lama considered Menri Treason his uncle, like they're related practices. And he too, when he was dying, I think it was stomach cancer, it was quite painful. He had his students seat him in his bed, and they put the parchments of the tradition in his lap, and he meditated right into his dying moments. I think about that all the time, and I thought about that all the time when I was recuperating from surgeries. Like, here he was leading by example in his physical body. I thought about him all the time and the gift that he gave as well. I'm fortunate to have had a lot of great teachers in the Buddhist traditions in particular, and they really believe that if a day goes by where you're not thinking about death, then it's a lost day. And one I will leave you with, because you might want to try this as you go to bed tonight, is from a teacher named Bhikkhu Analayo. He's a Vipassana teacher. And he sleeps in a bed that's literally the size of a coffin, like on his back as a practice. It is so hard to do. I just want to crawl up at the end of the day and go into the fetal position, and to just remember that you are in a body that is of the nature to die. Whew, even like 5 minutes of that practice is intense and worthwhile. So can we move into an exercise that involves all of you? All right. David is going to put up a terrific audio or visual display that he created for us. And you know, there are so many practices around death and dying, and I encourage everyone to join death cafes or death over dinner. There's one practice that came to my attention recently that I just love, and it is by an artist named Chang. And David, if you wouldn't mind starting the video, that would be great. So Chang lost one of her dear friends in the way that I lost Marissa. And after she died, she was struggling with a way to come to terms with her own mortality and mortality in general. And she started the Before I Die project, where she gets chalkboard paint and covers abandoned buildings or just blank walls with the stenciled question, "Before I die, I want to." And there are over 5,000 walls in the world right now, in 78 countries and 35 languages. And I thought I would read some of the responses from around the world to you. Before I die, I want to abandon all insecurities. I want to hold her one more time. I want to live in another country. I want to stop drinking. I want to make my kids proud. I want to go deep into the mysteries of my own soul. I want to tell Gina I'm sorry. I want to end racism. I want to be completely myself. Before I die, I want to stop wanting. So Catherine is going to play a few minutes of harp for us while we have the chance to think about how we would answer that question. Before I die, I want to. And when we come to the end of that, we'll have an opportunity to put our answers in chat and reflect on that together. Before I die, I want to pay homage to the ancient Greek temples. I want to be fearless. I want to offer the best of myself to all I do. I want to feel the oneness of all humanity for 1 full hour. Before I die, I want to live without fear. I want to live at my full potential in spirit. I want to make more music. I want to marry the man I love. I want to hold my grandchildren. I want to become fully whole, to experience being moved by who I am. I want to live in joy, walk in love, see with the eyes of love, and hear with the ears of love. I want to surrender to the mystery and joy, witness my niece and nephew becoming friends again. I want to make sure everyone I love knows how much I love and cherish them. I want to live at the beach. Oh, me too. I want to wake up to the truth of what I truly am. I want to be nothing but love. I want to hear God speak to me. I want to believe that we can save the planet from more disaster. Before I die, I want to help end the factory farming of sentient, loving beings. I want to approach everyone with an open heart. I want to live in the moment, in the light, in the love, in the now. I want to let go of wanting and embrace what is. I want to run workshops and offer grief coaching around grief and loss. I want to face my fears with courage. I want to write a book that says true things. I want to meet my soulmate and be in Ireland again with my mom and dad. I want to make a difference. I want to thank as many people as I can who have touched my life and let them know they matter. I'm going to stop there, but please do scroll through these because they are the art of living with the end in mind. Thank you. Thank you all for putting that out there. So we have a few minutes to answer questions, and that goes for all of us. David Wallace is such a beautiful teacher on death and loss and the places where we are most vulnerable in our lives. Catharine has endless experience, as does Martha, our chaplain at One Spirit. So please feel free to ask of any of us. And if you would raise your hands, I'll be able to find you more easily with the little emoji hand.
Natalie, you're up.
Oh, hello, everyone.
Hi, Natalie.
It's so phenomenal. So in reading your story, Barbara, about and I visualize, you wrote it so well that I visualize what your father had gone through when he lost his, I don't want to say too much about the story, I'm not sure who's read it, but there was a tragedy. And all of us are here in light of tragic events that have occurred in the past. And I struggle with that. I struggle with, I met my husband because his father died, and he actually was in Germany and came back to the United States. And had his father not died, we would never have met. I'm sure everyone has stories like this where it's hard to justify something that's happened in light of what is. And so would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Natalie. Early on in my life, I was struck with this realization that someone had to die for me to live, for me to even be born. And this is so early in the book that I will just tell you, and it's not like a spoiler alert, but it's my father's first wife who died tragically in a boating accident while she was pregnant and not long after their wedding. My father modeled for me what it was like to include Maureen in our family life, but my mother did as well. And one of the things that my mother did, which was so incredibly beautiful, was every Christmas to lay a wreath at my father's first wife's grave. And she did this her entire life for all the years that she lived. And that generosity to include people who are no longer with us, I mean, it's such a bodhisattva move on my mom's part. But we can do this. I mean, it requires that we open our tent so wide that the dead become part of the living. And this is why I appreciate culture so much, like the Day of the Dead and the Double Nine ceremony in Asia, where people go and clean the grave sides and remember people who are lost. I love these traditions, and I think in a culture where we run away from death, to bring some kind of remembrance of these loved ones in, whether that be a photograph or story sharing, I think it's important.
Yes, hi, I'm coming to you from a CVS parking lot. Sorry for the maybe not great visual. Barbara, I just wanted to thank you so much for your beautiful book. My question was actually going to be similar to the one just asked. So instead, I'll just offer my thanks. And the strange sort of coincidence, I was informed about tonight's call by the woman who was the birth doula at the birth of my son, Reverend Nora Hermina, who is part of the One Spirit community. I had just finished your book for a death and dying chaplaincy course I'm taking, and I sent her the link and I said, I think you'd really enjoy this book. And she said, oh, I know Barbara, and there's a Zoom with her tonight. You should go. So I just want to thank you so much. I took so much from your book. I recently lost my father, also named George, strangely enough. But just thank you so much for the beautiful work that you've put out into the world.
Thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate getting to know you by face, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Sarah?
So, at the risk of being like that person who asks the woman who just had a baby when she's having another one, what do you see on the future for you as Heartwood makes its way into the world? What's next on the horizon?
Well, one thing I'm super excited about is that our very own Reverend David Wallace and I are going to be teaching a class starting in February on some teachers that we love and are incredibly inspired by, which are the American transcendentalists, Emerson and Thoreau, and the women, like never forget the women, Elizabeth Peabody and Margaret Fuller, and sort of their eclectic visionary spirituality, and how I really believe that our spiritual but not religious culture stems from these early American philosophers. So that's one thing I'm super excited about. So we've been reading like crazy and generating all this content, and I hope you'll join us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Pam.
So Barbara, I've worked for a long time in end of life care as a chaplain also. I recently retired from that, and I've gone to work for a funeral home as the director of community education. Wow. And one of the things that I've realized in making that change is that we talk a lot about continuum of care in the healthcare field. But that ends when a person dies. And I'm now aware that funeral homes and people who do ritual, very much like what you're doing in Potter's Field and whatever, need to be a part of that continuum of care earlier on for families. So I'm doing some educational efforts around that. But I'm wondering, how do we work with healthcare staff to say that's not the end of the process and prepare them to help people for the next step?
Beautiful question. And I'm so glad you're doing this work, because I believe in the power of ritual. And I think we need to, one of the things I'm really excited about doing is speaking at some grand rounds at hospitals, talking to doctors and medical staff about how to do this work in a way that continues after we die. I noticed that Amy Cunningham is on this call. And if you ever have a chance to take a class with Amy Cunningham, who is our brilliant East Coast green funeral director, please do so. I would even encourage you to check out her website, because she has a lot of ideas for how to do this.
Dear Marissa.
Hello, Martha. Barbara, I'm a cancer coach. I work with people who predominantly have pancreatic cancer, and who are often told that you're definitely going to die from this. And so for me, there's such the importance of having hope, of believing that what looks maybe even impossible can be possible, that we can reimagine things. And I was just interested in hearing more about your thoughts about hope and optimism.
I love that question, because I think it goes right to the heart of meeting people where they are. I mean, it almost becomes a trite expression. It's said so much in this field, meet people where they are. But I remember meeting with a hospice patient who, it was clear to me that she had just weeks, if not days or hours to live. But she wanted to talk about going to Jamaica. Like, she really wanted to be there. And my job wasn't to tell her, no, you're not going to make it to Jamaica, but to go with her on that journey, because something in her soul wanted her to be in Jamaica. Like, what is it about Jamaica? Tell me about Jamaica. And I heard about her family, and I heard about her love of the beach. And I think that that's it. Now, one of the Zen teachers who trained me in the hospice work told me something that I will never forget, which is that sometimes we think we're going to go into a room and talk to a patient about the truth and also the existential questions. But if they want to show up, if they want to just sit there and watch Jeopardy, for instance, on TV, our job is just to sit there, pull up a chair and watch Jeopardy with them. So I think hope is important. It's such an elemental piece of who we are as human beings. And I think we go there. We ask open-ended questions and we keep our mouths shut. It's really a lot about listening more than talking. Thank you for that.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. Hope, inspiration, how we show up in the world, the art of living, the art of living. So in closing, not totally closing, because Barbara's going to give a benediction, but in this little mini closing, when the time comes for us to leave the earthly plane, may we, like Anne Dunham, become as birds ready to take flight.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you, everyone. I just want to end with the evening Gata, which is the chant said in Zen temples all over the world at the closing of the day. So I will say it, and then we will open mics and just be able to bask in each other's loveliness. Okay. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly by and opportunity is lost. On this night, the days of our life are decreased by one. Each of us must strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life.